Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to the second day and afternoon of Ignite. How's it been so far? Excellent, yes. All right, well, it's going to get even better in other sessions after this one. No, just kidding. It's going to get better. So this session, just to make sure that you know which session you're in, this session is Being Friends with Mark Rusinovich. And what I'm going to cover in this session is how to flatter him for being so tall, how to work system internals into every conversation with him, and how to talk about his book in every conversation. No, that's not what I'm talking about here. All right, so this is actually getting started with IaaS, or infrastructure as a service. How many people deploy infrastructure as a service today? Okay, cool. How many deploy that on Azure? That was fewer hands. Yes, okay, good. So now's my chance. What I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the overall platform. I'm going to spend some time explaining how this fits in, how this plays out. Then I'm going to talk to you about the components themselves, how they work on Azure, and I will give you a few demos, walk you through a few things. This is a 200-level session, 200 spilling in a little bit into 300, just to make sure sort of you're aware of the level of content that we have. And the deep dive on this content was actually this morning. The ordering was a little bit tricky, so after this session, if you're like, great, I want to learn more, you can go watch that deep dive on video. Okay. So let me start. Azure Platform Overview. So I just start with a few exciting aspects of the momentum, and there's a few things that are particularly exciting when it comes to infrastructure as a service. The upper left, the 90,000 customers in a given month. Over here on all the way to the left, 50 trillion storage objects. And when I talk to you a little bit about hyperscale and sort of what we're learning when it comes to hyperscale and how we're applying that to being able to run sort of the best public cloud around, a lot of that comes from this massive amount of scale that we see on things like storage, Azure Active Directory, and the like. The other aspect, and half of my team works on Linux and half of my team works on Windows, so the other aspect that's very exciting is the 1 out of 5 VMs are running Linux. And so we do have a good mix, and we're learning more and more about how to run a very great infrastructure as a service offering that supports both Windows and Linux. I'll be spending most of my time today on the Windows side, talking about SQL, SharePoint, etc., but I will touch a little bit on some of the Linux aspects as well. Okay. So when we think about the Azure Cloud Platform, we do really think about it in sort of 3 concentric circles, a Venn diagram, if you will. Mostly because at Microsoft, if you draw a Venn diagram, people think that you're smart. And so in a huge slide, I'm proving to you how freaking smart I am. Look at that. Okay. And so across these 3, we look at hybrid, enterprise grade, and hyperscale. Across the 3 of these, we think that Azure offers a unique service that no one else offers. And I'll walk through each one individually. So first, hyperscale. From a hyperscale perspective, there are sort of 3 aspects that we look at. And being able to run a hyperscale cloud has a big impact on our ability to do a lot of things. One, of course, is global coverage. So today we have 19 regions. We're moving to 21 very soon. And so the amount of coverage and how close we can get these solutions and services to your customers, to the extension of the different parts of your company that you're managing for a global company or a growing company is very important. And so we're able to get close to you, we're able to deploy into the regions that you're in and get the services and infrastructure as a service offering as tight as possible to where you want to go. Then within those regions, the ability to scale to be able to handle all sorts of workloads. And I'll give you some examples of this, but one of the big important aspects of this is as you continue to grow and as you continue to look to move more and more into the public cloud, you want to have that confidence that the cloud that you're going to is not going to run out, that their space is not going to come to a close. And I'll talk to you a little bit about some of the planning that we do to make sure that we live up to that promise. And then hyperscale platform, which I'll actually work through the entire presentation about how you can build your solutions and how you can deploy your solutions to be able to take advantage of this. So first, from a global coverage. 2013, we were located in these positions. And just in the last year, we've actually grown out to the orange ones. And so quite a bit of growth, quite a bit of additional capital expenditures to deploy in these different places. Australia, Japan being two big ones, and of course Brazil as well. And coming soon, we have 2 coming in India to round out, again, the global coverage that we hope to have this year. We have many more still coming, but I'm not going to reveal any of those locations. Unless you say after, then maybe. No, just kidding. And so when I think about the regions and the scale of the regions, this is sort of where I get into the making sure that the cloud provider you're going with or the way in which you're deploying, you're not going to run out of capacity. So in the places that we see a lot of growth, a great example is East US 2, where we see a huge amount of growth in East US. And how we prepare for that is we actually prepare ahead of time the amount of land, the amount of power, and the amount of space to be able to grow to this type of magnitude. And so we don't actually have this many servers in any of our regions just yet, but we pre-position those regions to be able to grow this big. And so this is that level of confidence and trust that you have that, look, if I deploy and I choose to bet on this, it's not going to turn out that we run out, right? And so this gives you that promise, that sense of confidence. And just to give you a sense of scale, this is actually not to scale. These are intended to be football fields or soccer fields, depending on which sport you prefer. And those are supposed to be jets to give you a sense of scale. One of the common misconceptions is that we actually put our servers inside jets. That's not true. It is a great way to get your servers to the cloud, though. Thank you. All right, that's it, guys. Thanks. I'll see you later. No. All right. I got to laugh, so that's it. I'm done. Okay. And so as we look at the way people are scaling their applications, one of the other things that we're seeing is that the type of applications are changing. So there's obviously a huge amount of this lift and shift, the huge amount of just taking the applications and moving them and deploying them, which is great. And we're seeing that en masse from a lot of different customers and partners. But being able to handle all different types of scaling applications, whether it be grow up, grow down, be able to change with the wind, things like our Azure Batch solution or our Hadoop offering, and being able to handle that scale very dynamically, of course, again, comes back to having that overall capacity that you can trust in. Even some of the traditional scaling points like a SQL database, being able to handle that capacity and that growth, which is typically not scaling down, mostly just growing up. How do we handle that coupled with that very dynamic scale? And then things like a Cassandra ring or things like Service Fabric, which we've announced last week, and being able to handle the scale of those requirements and the regional and proximity requirements that those types of solutions have. And so again, when you look at the overall scale of the cloud provider that you're working with, you want to make sure that they have the capacity that's going to be able to meet pretty much any of your future demands, not just your current demands. Okay. So hybrid's a really exciting one. And hybrid's one that I think we've got a really different perspective. And I'm going to walk through this both in the beginning and I'll come back to it at the end. And for me, hybrid splits into 3 different categories. One is connectivity, and this is kind of an obvious one. It's the pipe, right? How do I connect into the cloud to be able to take advantage of the services, treat it just like my own data center? But then the other 2 are pretty unique with Azure. One is the consistency story, which you saw with Azure Stack, and the ability to deploy the same applications in both places in a private, hosted, and public cloud. And then one is the connected services, which you saw with OMS. The ability to have services that take advantage of that scale point that I just mentioned without you necessarily having to move everything into the cloud. That's a really important aspect and a really important principle for us. Our goals are not to move everything you've got into Azure. If you want to, we're there for you. But that is not our goal. Our goal is to offer the services and solutions that's going to make you running your in business, your IT staff, all of your aspects of your company in a way that's easy and simpler than it used to be. And so from a connectivity perspective, we offer a few different options to connect. Very simple one that's just SSL-based. So it's just 443 from a single box, and you can connect in. It's called point-to-site, and it just uses a very simple software-defined VPN solution to connect into Azure. And it makes Azure look like you're on local network from that single box, but the rest of the corporate environment is shielded and protected from it. And it's typically something that developers will set up to use, and not something typically used for broad enterprise connectivity or IT connectivity. The next one is the VPN device. And so this is using a physical VPN device. A huge amount of options here, Juniper, Cisco, et cetera, where you can connect and be able to connect to the entire site in Azure with the entire site you have running on premises. And this is called site-to-site. And an important aspect, and typically the first way that people connect their IT corporation into Azure, because it does create the full connectivity between the two. And then the last, which we call ExpressRoute, which is the connection using providers, folks like AT&T and Verizon, or using carrier hotels like Equinix and Level 3, where you'll set up a hardwire, really, a hard link into Azure. And so a great example of this, you'll call AT&T and say, I want in. And presumably you're already using AT&T for some of your NPLS-based connectivity, and they'll enable the connection straight into Azure. And you'll get a lot higher throughput. You'll also get that dedicated line that they offer, and sort of the promise and the SLA that they give you will extend then to your connectivity into Azure. And we really see as folks start to grow and expand their usage, when they reach that point where they're truly treating Azure as another site of their overall ecosystem, ExpressRoute becomes a very, very viable option. And so when you look at ExpressRoute and the connectivity that it offers, we have a great set of offers around the globe to be able to connect with ExpressRoute, and again, a great set of partners. And the key thing that was recently announced was you can use that same ExpressRoute connectivity pipe to connect to Office 365, which is really, really valuable, because you can go in and say, I want to get all of my email, SharePoint, et cetera, and also get connectivity into Azure with that one carrier and that one promised pipe. Very exciting stuff. And then the other aspect of the network that we offer beyond the ExpressRoute solutions are the point of presence for CDN. And those, of course, are for the apps that you're running that you may be sharing outside your corporation, outside your organization, based on customer-consumer applications, and you can take advantage of that to host content closer to those customers. So we do have 31 of those sites as well. And on top of that connectivity, a huge part of our hybrid story is the consistency story. And we believe very strongly in this. It's very exciting. The Azure Stack was a great announcement of this ability to deploy the same app in multiple places. And at the end of the presentation, I'll actually walk you through some sample apps, including a SharePoint farm, that will be possible to deploy in, again, private, hosted, and public clouds. And as part of this, we have a very large partner network that we're building. And we've already got this partner network on the previous generation of Azure Stack, the Azure Pack. Names can be very confusing. The Azure Pack, which are called our Cloud OS network. And when you look at this, these are the purple dots that are filling the screen now. They end up covering a much wider breadth of the globe. For a lot of the places that it may not make sense for us to have Azure data centers, for solutions that may have different requirements than we enable. You want a cage around every one of your servers, and we're not going to do that in the public cloud. You may want specific requirements around who's operating it, right? And so all of these types of requirements, or you may want one in South Africa, right, which we don't have a public presence yet. And so what this is going to enable is these hosted offerings, again, built on the back of that Azure Stack solution, will give you a consistent experience of cross-management and deployment at a much wider breadth than what a public cloud provider can do. And this is why we love our hybrid story and our hybrid strategy. And this is where sort of IaaS becomes really critical in this, because these workloads you're going to deploy and want to deploy everywhere in the world. And you don't want to be constrained to just the 19 locations that we offer. You may want to go other places. You may want to have different requirements. And while a lot of those hosted providers are likely going to be smaller or more constrained than we are, they're going to offer different things, again, like location. And so this is a huge part of where we sort of view the overall IaaS strategy taking us forward is, again, this overall hybrid coverage. And so what we already have today with our Azure Stack network is more than 100 countries covered, more than 600 local data centers, 100 world-class partners, and 3.7 million customers deployed on this. The last aspect of hybrid, which is what I like to call connected services. And these are services that take advantage of the scale of the cloud on the VMs and hardware that you're already running without you having to move everything into the cloud. Right? And so, this fits very much into the overall IaaS conversation because they typically will span across IaaS that you're running in the public cloud and VMs and physical machines that you haven't moved or don't want to move for whatever the reason may be, whether it be compliance, whether it be comfort. There's a lot of reasons why it makes a lot of sense to keep some things or lots of things in a private environment. And so what we want to offer here is take advantage of some of the scale aspects of the public cloud while still getting to keep things exactly where they are. And so a great example of this is the Operations Management Suite, which has brought together a bunch of these services. And so if I show sort of this slide and kind of talk through it, a bunch of these services like site recovery, like backup, the malware assessment, being able to track this log analytics, all of this is going to be hybrid experiences with your IaaS VMs running in Azure and your solutions running on premises in private clouds, in hosted clouds. You'll be able to do and connect all of this together, have a consistent view of all your backups. One of the things that we recently announced was direct backup support for IaaS VMs running in the cloud. And we'll take those VMs running, we'll freeze the disks, we'll do the backup, make it a consistent backup, and it sits right next to the backups for your VMs running on premises. And so when we think hybrid, it's not just a vacuum cleaner. It really is sort of this belief that you're going to run hybrid for a long time. And we want to make sure those experience around the VMs, the experience around being able to manage and back up and monitor these solutions are going to have a consistent story across that hybrid deployment. Okay. The last aspect of the Azure Cloud Platform that we are very excited about is enterprise grade. These two get the nice logos. So the lock means security. And then, if you can guess this other one, it's scale up. It's not that great. Okay. So let me talk a minute about security and sort of our view on this and sort of how this fits into infrastructure as a service. So we look at security across 4 concentric rings. The outer one is the physical, and this is the lockdown environments, the fact that you have multi-factor auth on all of our solutions, barriers, fencing, etc. And one of the things for this that we really, when we look at our overall scale, you come back to the security that we can offer. Because of our scale, we're able to offer security solutions that maybe individually most companies can't offer. Because for us, in some ways, the security that we offer is a footnote on the 600,000 servers that we're buying. Right? And so we can offer top-of-the-line security for a nominal marginal cost because so many servers are going in, we end up getting that hyperscale cost benefit. Same thing with infrastructure, which is our software. This is the software that we built and the security promise around the APIs that you're going to call to deploy VMs are going to be heavily penetration tested to make sure that there aren't flaws in them. The connecting into your virtual machines, running extensions on them, running PowerShell on them, all of that has been validated using the same rules of security that we've been running in Microsoft for many, many years to be able to test this and be able to watch exploits that may be happening. The other aspect about this is, of course, the global scale gives us forensics knowledge that, again, any smaller provider wouldn't be able to get. Because we can take all of the data of all of the 19, soon to be 21, regions, and take all that content and do analysis based on it so that we can detect exploits happening way before they start impacting the broader community. And the next 2 in are more the security offerings that we offer you. One is on the network, and I'll go into some detail later. But on the network, we offer you the ability to create a virtual network, so it's completely isolated and abstracted from other customers running in the cloud. You can put security groups on it, which gives you ACL control, so you can lock down who can talk to whom within that network. You can use Azure Active Directory to get role-based control on who can update which parts of your network and when. And then security appliances, some things that we've announced this week, very exciting, solutions that enable you to control all of your routing. So you can actually put all of your routing and all of the ACLing and security group controls down into a single file. And that file then can allow you to deploy things like intrusion detection devices. something that we see from our IT department as a very strong requirement. They've started moving lots and lots into Azure, and they have a strong requirement that between Azure and what's running in an on-premise environment has intrusion detection in between. And so they route all traffic through it, and then they reroute it back out. And so this is something that this week we've announced support to be able to do that, and it's a really important aspect to the overall security and promise that you're going to get running these VMs in Azure. And then the last is on the VM. And so a few aspects here. For Windows VMs, we offer free anti-malware when you're deploying in Azure. So you just click a button, configure it, and away you go. We also offer partner solutions. So you can deploy Symantec, you can deploy Trend Micro, you can deploy McAfee, and configure it right through the portal experience. Also, with logging and auditing, you can see who's trying to access what parts of your service. And then finally, another solution that we've announced this week that I'll go into is the combination of Key Vault, which is an HSM-backed security solution that you can now encrypt your entire VM, OS disk and data disk, taking advantage of a host-supplied key that then uses BitLocker from within the guest. And so across these 4 rings, we're extremely excited over the amount of security that we can offer you and the amount of trust that you can get running in the Azure cloud. As I mentioned just a moment ago, Key Vault and encryption. And so what we offer with Key Vault, it's in preview right now, but we'll be moving to GA soon. It's an HSM-protected security solution. You can put your keys and passwords in it, right? And we see this as a very common requirement as people look to move their security solutions into the cloud. It scales with your app. So as you start using more and more of these VMs that you're going to use these keys, we'll scale with you, making it truly that feel of a service versus just a device. And we have integration with SQL to encrypt SQL databases directly from the SQL experience. And what's new is you can actually encrypt OS disks and data disks and upload them with a key to make sure that everything is encrypted from the beginning. And this becomes a very common requirement. We've heard this from folks in the financial sector where they have their models installed onto boxes, and they want to make sure that there's no point that this box will be non-encrypted. It may not meet everyone's needs. It may not be required for everyone, but it does add a lot of value for those who need it. And then the other aspect, of course, is role-based access control, which is extremely critical. And with our Azure Active Directory offering, we can take the identities that you've got in an on-premise environment and bring them right into the cloud. And so you revoke on-premises, it revokes in the cloud, they all lose access, and it makes it very easy to manage and maintain. And so with that, you can control read-write. You can make sure that only the right folks can read your stuff, or you want to restrict them, you can do that as well. Okay. And then the last aspect of enterprise grade is, of course, the scale-up options, from highest value to largest scale-up. So from all the way to the left, A, very great place to start with our sizes, offers the highest value. And we have quite a few options on the A side from both a high memory offering and a non-high memory offering, right? And the high memory offering is a 7-to-1 gigs of memory to core. Then the D series came out, and that is a faster CPU. It's also SSD storage. And the movement from A to D, actually funny story, we decided B sounded too basic, so we didn't actually choose B as the letter. And a competitor has C as one of their sizes, so we didn't pick C. So we went with D. Makes sense. So D was the next size that we picked, and so that's the size we've got. Premium storage, which I'll get a chance to demo later, offers up to 64,000 IOPS. And very, very fast latency. And then G, which is our gigantic VM size. And we originally were going to call it E, but we moved to G to name it after a very famous lizard animal. It's really big. Not allowed to say it for trademark reasons, but it's from Japan. Thank you. Someone yelled it, yeah. And so we named it G. So a lot of thought goes into these names, you can tell. Okay. Anyway, so from a scale-up option, this enables, the G series, I don't know if I said it, 448 gig of local memory and 6.59 terabytes of local SSD storage. So just a huge monster of a VM size. All right. So That's kind of how IaaS fits into the overall platform. That's sort of how that pieces together, and gives you a little bit of a framework of sort of how we think about it as a product in the market. So let me actually get into some details on some of the components and how they work. So first, let me start with compute. Oh, excuse me. Why don't I start with storage instead? I'll start with storage first. And so all of our virtual machines have disks attached, obviously. We have the disk that's attached for the C drive, which is the Windows drive. And we have a temporary disk. Now, the temporary disk, you should not put content that you want to save on it. This will get lost if the hardware fails. We do not save it. I've had very painful conversations where people have said they put their database on that drive, and could they get it back? And I had to say no, and then they would yell at me. So I don't want you yelling at me. So please put your saved content onto C or onto data disks. And the reason why this is important, it goes into Azure Blobs. So the disks that are the saved content go into the Azure storage account, and you can add additional data disks, each 1 terabyte, and each one of these can go into an Azure Blob and be saved there. Okay. And so when they're saved in Azure Storage, they're saved a triplicate time. So every write that goes in actually is copied 3 times before we even come back and say it's done. And this gives you that sense of durability. Again, that promise, that trust that the data is going to be there. So 3 copies. They are in the form of VHDs because we're actually running Hyper-V in our stack. We're actually running the packaged and sold product of Hyper-V in our host. And so they are VHDs. We do limit them to 1 terabyte because on the storage side, that is the limit of the size that we have for blobs. And so you can get on standard storage up to 500 IOPS per disk, or 8,000 in total on a VM. Premium storage is a lot higher, and I'll show you that in a bit. So when you bring in this content, of course, it saves across 3 disks, and strangely enough, the disks do actually turn orange when you save on them. Oh, thank you, I got 1 laugh. All right. On top of the fact that we have the triplicate copies, we actually also do geo-replication. Now, you can turn this off, but by default, we do geo-replication, and that means that we will copy it in an asynchronous way greater than 400 miles away. And so an example is East US and West US, far enough away that a natural disaster happens, the data will be there. You can actually read the data ahead of time, and you can get the data back once that failure happens. And so when you look at some of the aspects of that geo-replication, I've color-coded this to kind of show you between which regions the geo-replication happens to get a sense of the cross-region aspects of this. So the color coding indicates who's replicating to whom. And so obviously Australia to Australia, Japan to Japan, and so on. Okay. So on top of the data disks, we also have another way to attach disks into an Azure VM. And this is by attaching an SMB share called Azure Files. And so with Azure Files, you can actually go in and use the Azure system, the triplicate copy that I promised before, but make them appear as if they're an SMB share. And so it enables you to copy between VMs. It enables you to put perhaps your installed content into a single location that can then be copied down at the same time or updated at the same time, just because it is an SMB share across all of your instances. And so we see this. It's also restricted to within the network that you're running in the Azure public cloud. So it means that other people outside can't get access to it if they're running from on-premises or what have you. Only can your instances inside the Azure cloud get to it. And we see this very commonly for like install content. You put install media down, and that SMB share will be there for you. Okay. And so the last big aspect of storage that's worth talking about is premium storage. Excuse me. Up to 32 terabytes of storage can be put on a single VM. We have seen upwards of 64,000 IOPS on a single VM. With 5,000 IOPS per disk, but much higher on read. That's actually write from a write perspective. And less than 1 millisecond read latency using the cache, and about 4 to 5 when there's no cache. And so the cache is really important. This is kind of a unique offering that we have. So when you look at the breakdown on premium storage, we actually, the only size that we offer for premium storage are the D series. And we actually take some of that local SSD and we bring it into the host. So instead of you having to say, gosh, you gave me all this SSD, I don't know how to use it because I'm using your persistent disks, why do I have to pay for that local SSD? I can't take advantage of it. Well, we believe we've solved that for you, which is we take some of it into the host and we turn it into a read cache. And we allow you to use that as much as possible without you even knowing or caring. Right? And so you'll see the reads that hit that cache very fast, less than 1 millisecond. Right? And so they won't actually leave the box, and they won't count against the IAPs that are being used there. And so you can actually run those numbers up very high because it's all local. And only if there's misses or if it's writes does it go through. We do not cache the writes. It's very important to make sure that those writes are consistent and going all the way through. So it enables us to have those much higher IOPS. 64,000 is higher than anyone else because we have this technology taking advantage of that local SSD. Okay. So let me spend a few minutes on compute. So compute, like I mentioned, the G family, the largest VM size we've got, 32 CPUs, 448 gig of RAM, 6.59 terabytes of local SSD, and you can attach up to 64 disks. So you can actually attach up to 64 disks, so 64 1-terabyte disks to this, enabling a very, very large amount of database space if you want to. So when you're connecting and building out this compute solution, you're probably thinking, I need HA, I need availability. And so what we offer to enable a HA solution or high availability is a technology called availability sets. And so as an example, you have a SQL server, you want to run a primary and a secondary, you put them into the same availability set, and that offers you the SLA promise that we have. It also protects you against hardware and software failures. And so what this looks like when it actually deploys in the system, for a rack that we have, the points of failure that we have in the hardware are on physical machines, which could, of course, fail. We also have power units and rack switches that can fail. And the power units, of course, power the whole rack, and the switches are the network for the whole rack. And any of these failing take down the whole rack. And so we're aware of this, and we actually program the system to be aware of this. And so when you say, I want 2 or actually 3 in an availability set, what we do is we say, hey, that means you probably want them in different racks. And so we'll take the virtual machines that you've got deployed, SQL Server 1, SQL Server 2, and we'll make sure that they're split across racks. So now you're protected against the most common failures there are. Physical machine, TORs, PDUs, et cetera. And we do this all programmatically. You just say, put them in the same availability set. We make sure that they're split out across those racks. And so again, you see that one failure, and the other one remains up, and away you go. So the last aspect of compute that I really wanted to spend some time on is technology called extensions. And extensions really are there to make it easier to run IaaS on Azure. They extend the power of your virtual machine. They enable easier management. And we actually support a broad partner ecosystem. But the VM is still a VM. You're still logging in. You can still manage it the way you'd manage it. But we get things down onto the VM that you may want down. So a great example is, let's say you have a VM. You want to run some PowerShell script on it. And maybe you want to install Semantic on it. You'll pass that through the API. You'll pass it through the template language or do it directly in the portal. We'll take it down. We'll put it on the box. We'll configure it. And you're ready to roll. And so with that support, we offer a wide range of extensions. Solutions like our anti-malware offering. You can go in and reset your password, which turns out is perhaps one of the most common extensions that people use today. Docker is installed this way on Linux VMs. And so the same technology that does it on Windows does it on Linux to enable a consistent partner story. So Chef, you can put on both Windows and Linux. You're not restricted by the OS. Our anti-malware solutions, Semantic, Trend Micro, McAfee, all offered this way. And, of course, the scripting languages. Even SQL has, excuse me, even SQL has an extension which does things like auto backup. And so using these extensions, you have lots of power. Things like, again, being able to run a PowerShell script. Being able to set up Octopus. How many people know what Octopus is? Okay, good. I don't either. I just put it on my slide. I hear it's popular. Okay, set up Visual Studio Release Manager to be able to deploy things directly from Visual Studio onto the box. And then, of course, Chef, Puppet, and Salt for some of the DevOps type solutions to be able to deploy and manage your instances using those. Extensions are there to configure and manage those agents. And so, great, you can deploy Puppet, you can deploy Chef straight onto the box. Like I said before, this is also how SQL does a lot of their auto management, whether it be configuring HA, but also whether it be configuring patching and backup or encryption. It's all done using an extension the SQL team has built and maintained to be able to manage these instances. And the whole idea is to simplify IaaS. You know, you're coming into the cloud, you're excited about using IaaS, but if it just is those VMs that you're running on premises, sort of like, what's the point? Well, hopefully with some of these solutions, it becomes easier to do some of the things that maybe weren't so easy before. And with that, let me actually spend a few minutes showing you a few things, since I've talked a ton so far. Okay. So here we are. I'm in my Azure account, and I'll show you actually a couple different accounts. And so this one I haven't really done anything in. This is actually my MSDN account, so I have some free usage here that I can go spend time on, $150, which is great. And so just to show you quickly how simple this is, very easy for me to just go in and create a VM. So here I'm going to create one. And I have a whole bunch of options to be able to create one of these compute instances. I can create, SharePoint Farm, which I'll show you later. I can create Oracle instance. I can create Windows, Linux, whatever I may want. I'm actually going to show you SQL, though. And so I go in and create SQL. And amazingly simple, I can put in the host name. Okay, not taken. Username, password. And so here's my sizes. And so as I mentioned, sort of the D series, I can go in, I can pick the D series from the list. Let's go in and do a view all. And so a whole lot of different options that I can deploy from, whether it be the D series, the A series, as I mentioned. Looks like I'm in the wrong region here to deploy some of these sizes. Let me actually go and change this to West US and come back and take a look at those sizes. And so here you can see now I have the G series. That's an option. So I can now deploy the G series as I showed you before. And there's the 32 cores, 448 gig of memory. I can deploy premium storage instances and all those goodies as well. And so here I'll go ahead and deploy a DS14, which means a premium storage image, the D14 size, so 16 cores, 112 gig of memory. That'll spend my MSDN account real fast, won't it? Okay. Maybe I won't actually deploy it. And so I can go in, and this is the cool part. And so this is the optional configuration. And so here you can see it has a bunch of settings. I can go in and control the OS settings, and I can configure solutions. But here's the part that I really wanted to show you. And this goes back to the extension that I mentioned. I can go in, and this says SQL Automated Backup. So there it is right there. Oh, wrong way. There we go. SQL Automated Backup, and I can go in and I can hit Enable. And so using that extension, now I can select things like the retention period that I want for SQL. I can enable encryption. I can pick the storage account that this is going to. All deeply integrated into this simple create experience. Same thing here, and let me actually go back. SQL Automated Patching. Yeah, okay, I'll move forward here. Enable this, and again, now I can say it uses Windows Update, so it's nothing fancy, right? It uses the technology that you know and maybe love. You know it at least. And I can pick the window that I want the maintenance. And so this will configure Windows Update using the SQL extension and set this all up for me to go. And so it's really, really great and makes it super easy to deploy some of these solutions that maybe were a little bit harder to deploy historically. So if I'm actually looking and want to spend a little bit more time on this, there's actually a very large marketplace of content from partners. And so here I can actually go down and take a look, and let me actually pick Azure Certified here. And so these are certified partners that we've got. Huge amount of partners listed here. And so just a large set of applications and solutions that you can deploy and start off with without having to go figure out how to buy it or these types of solutions you can get going right away. And so things like Barracuda Spam Firewall, ready to roll, right? Right here in the portal. And so this whole marketplace experience, there's data stacks, you can launch that. So the marketplace experience is geared towards making it really easy to get started and get going. All right, so once you're deployed, and I'm going to skip over here. Once you're deployed, maybe you're saying to yourself, how do I manage this sucker? Well, I'm glad you asked. So first, why don't I connect here into a virtual machine that I've got. Let's see here. I thought I hit connect. There we go. Disregard that I'm using Chrome. I use both. I'm going to stop talking. All right. So I'm going to connect now to the virtual machine and be able to sort of take a look at it. While that's connecting, let me actually go over here. You can see it is running. It's healthy. I'll actually go over to the settings. And one of the things I really wanted to show you was the disks we've got deployed. Okay? And so we've got a few disks attached. We've got a 800 gigabyte disk, a 200 gigabyte disk, and a few 1 terabyte disks. So let me actually go in here as soon as it secures my connection. And what I'm going to actually take a look at is, with those disks, some of them are being exposed directly to the virtual machine. Some of them are being brought in through a pool that's available, of course, through Windows. Oops, not the right one. Here we go. Oh, it still seems to be securing. So I told you how secure we were. It's proof at how secure we were. And so when I go in, you'll be able to see the virtual, there we go. Okay, so you'll be able to see all the disks that are attached. So let me actually come over here, and you can see sort of the disks that are attached. And so quite a few options here to be able to attach these disks and manage them. So I'm going to go here and go to PC and sort of show you, the different disks that are attached. And so here's the 200 gig one, the local disk. We also have the temporary storage one. Again, this is the one that you should not put things on that you want to keep. And we have the 800 gigabit disk here. And so my log and my data file, for example, that I may be using for my service. And then, of course, the 1 terabyte disk for the new volume. And so through this, I can go in and I can actually attach a new disk if I wanted to. And be able to configure that and set the size and configure it all directly here in the portal. But I'm not going to do it in the portal. The reason why I'm not going to do it in the portal is because I'm kind of a PowerShell guy. So what I'm going to show you is actually how I would do this if I did it in PowerShell. And so we have a huge set of PowerShell commandlets to be able to manage and run these same IaaS VMs, but using a full scripted language and be able to access control and be able to deploy things using that scripting language. And so just to start off, my entire goal was just to add a disk. So what I'm going to start off by doing is actually adding my account. And so to do that, I'll add my Azure account, very easy. And what that does here, and set the subscription that I want to use, which happens to be the Cori application subscription in Cori East. And so I'll run that, and you'll see here it pulls up a prompt for me to be able to log in. And so what this is doing is it's actually using Azure Active Directory through PowerShell to make sure that I have the authentication to be able to do this. And so let me go ahead and sign in here. And it should actually, yep, there we go. So actually, corporate-wise, Microsoft demands two-factor auth. Right? And so I can't just log in with my password. I actually have to have my smart card, which I do. Hooray. That would have been embarrassing if I didn't. And so now with my smart card, two-factor auth, now I can access my account. Right? And so it gives you that, again, that goes back to that security point that I made earlier. And so with that now, I'm logged in, and I can now say, OK, great. Show me the VMs that are running. And so with that, I can see, and OK, there's my VM with disk. So this is the VM that I want to go do some work on. And so let me go ahead and set that as my working disk. And what I'm going to do here is, as I said, I'm going to add an Azure disk. So I'll pipe in the VM to it. I'll create a new disk, size 1023. I'll label it. I'll even choose the LUN that I'm going to put this guy on. Right? So I can control the LUN, and I'll update the disk, and away I go. And so let me just get that rolling here. And so while that's rolling, let me kind of go back to the portal experience and show you a little bit of some of the other things you can do here. So the portal experience, on top of being able to obviously do all this configuration setting, there's actually a huge amount of monitoring that you can get through the portal experience. So here you can actually see the CPU, the disk read and write. So I'll actually open up the disk read and write, and you can see sort of the history that I've got. And this is probably was when I was preparing the demo. Yep, 10 p.m. last night, I was preparing the demo, so I went on and did a bunch of read and write. And so really early, 10 p.m., it was nice. I got it ahead of time. I think I retested it again there at 3 a.m. And so yeah, you'll see it spike here now pretty soon. And so this, can track that. I also happen to have an alert in place. And this stuff's really cool, actually. So you can go in and you can basically say, here's my alert that I've got, and disk read is high. That's the alert that I've created. And so what this does is you can configure this. You can based on whatever metric you want to set it on, right? And so .NET, CLR metric, cache faults. You can actually make it all based on a SQL metric. So if you're running SQL and you want, based on active requests goes up, you want to go send yourself an email. Great, no problem. And you set your threshold, and so here it's, the bytes per second is the threshold. And over the last 5 minutes, and I can go ahead and send myself an email. I can send it to my service account, or I can type in a new email and make sure that I get it. And so with that, you're able to sort of have that alert in place and immediate based on what's deploying in the cloud. And so the last time it actually deployed was 4 hours ago. Probably by the work that I'm doing on it now, we'll actually see it. We'll see those emails start flying in here later on. And so let me go back here. So the disks are attached. So you can here see APS disk. So this has been attached. Let me actually go back in to my VM and hit F5 on this. And so originally there was just one unknown disk, so one 1 terabyte disk. Now there's 2. Okay? And so it comes in, it's not formatted, right? It's primordial, as it says through the experience. And now I can add it to a storage pool. I can go and format it and make it its own disk. And then it will maintain that, however I decide to take it forward, it will maintain that moving forward. Okay, great. So the other thing I wanted to show you here, and so let me go to the C drive here. Okay, you can see the C drive's got nothing on it. I feel it's like a magic show, right? Nothing's there, okay. Now let me go back in here and kind of show you that extension story that I was just talking about. Okay, and so if I go down to extensions, and this is sort of what I was talking about earlier, the large amount of options that you have here, okay? And so what I'll actually do is go custom script, okay? So this runs PowerShell. It runs it as an administrator on the box. So amazingly simple to go manage my virtual machine. So I can go in and say, okay, I'll select a file, not those weird pictures of me. Let's go ahead and say, wow, PowerShell, okay, echo script, okay? And so I'm going to go ahead and hit run on this, and it will launch that. And so what that's doing is it's taking this script that I generated, and it's going to launch it as an administrator on the box. The other options that you have for extensions are actually quite variable. Let's see here. Well, while that's coming up here, let me go to show you what that script looks like. So what that script is going to do, it's really clever, is it says this is a cool demo, and it's going to write that to a file called Corey text on the box. And it's running in the C drive, so it's obviously an administrator privileged script. So let me actually go into the box. Let's hit F5. Is it there already? Was I too fast? Okay, well, while that's coming up, let me show you the other extensions that we've got here. And so like I mentioned, you can go in and you can control, you can set up Chef here. You can set up Microsoft anti-malware. And so this is a great example of all the configuration settings you can do. So here you can do excluded files, excluded file extensions and processes. This is all setting up anti-malware. Again, a free product on our Windows offering in Azure. And you can even just run a scan from here. Just kick off a scan straight from this portal experience. All of this can be done through PowerShell as well. So let me go back to the box. Hopefully it worked. Did it work? There it is. Look at that. So, and indeed it is a cool demo. I'm going to zoom in on that just to make sure you... Oh, I can't zoom in on it. Now I can zoom in on it. There we go. Look at that. Okay. All right, great. Let me actually do one last thing here. One last quick demo, and then I'm going to get back to the presentation. The last demo I wanted to show you was the power of premium storage. I'm just kind of going to walk through this very quickly. So if you look at sort of, again, I'm running Iometer. I've got a few VMs that I've got available. This is just a standard disk, that's running, and you can see here it runs at about 500 IOPS. Interesting, not that exciting. So let me stop that, close that down. Now if I go back to the disks and go read cache, and this is running actually premium storage, hit that same test, and we're up at 5,000, right? And so that's running a lot faster, able to do a lot more. So let me show you one last aspect here. So now if I put all those together, put 20 disks on a box, take advantage of maybe a storage pool across those 20 disks, now I can run that same thing, and here you can see I'm running about 64,000 IOPS. Right? And so with this, you imagine a SQL Server running on this, you've got a huge amount of speed and performance that you need to run pretty much any workload you may want in Azure. All right. Let me go back here to the slides and talk a little bit about the network. And so that I showed you that one example of the setting up an alert. Here is sort of what that alert could look like coming through. It would show up as an email in your account, and it would tell you, hey, your disk read was greater than 1. And so over the last 5 minutes, and it will actually tell you this happened and send that email. And again, you can hook that up to all of those monitoring metrics that I showed. Okay, the last aspect of the IaaS components is network. And this spans across a few things. One, it spans across a load balancer, and so you can configure load balancing, which takes that incoming port, translates to an outgoing port to those instances. You can set up ACLs on this. You can even configure client affinity on this. And so for those SharePoint solutions, you can actually set this up to try and take advantage of that client affinity going to the underlying box. You can also configure the HTTP probe to make sure that you have the right health checks in place when things go down. And so this load balancing can be done in a few different ways. It can, of course, go through the public IP, but you can also do internal load balancing. So if you're connected completely within your environment, you can use an internal load balancer and be able to use that to make sure the traffic never leaves your environment. Same thing for front end to back end using that internal IP. You can set that up to make sure that when you're talking to that back end, you can span the traffic across it. A great example of this is using SQL Always On. You may use this as your back end across that internal IP. And so you can imagine coming back to that HA story that I had, across the 3 devices, a load balancer included, a single VM going down, and all the traffic from that load balancer gets redirected to that other instance, and your application stays up. All of this offered as part of the overall offering. Okay? And as I mentioned, you can ACL access down between the different tiers. So you may have a front end, you may have back end, you may want to say the front end can't talk to the back end. You can control the ACLs, you can control the ports that they can talk to make sure all the different subnets and instances in your infrastructure are going to be locked down in the way that you want them to be locked down. All this configured through the template language. Similar through the back end, you can have the same sort of ACL control talking back home. And a good usage of this is one very special case, which we call forced tunneling. And this is for all of the line of business apps that our IT department deploy, they deploy this way, which is every traffic has to go back through that tunnel. It has to go back through the secure pipe to the on-premises data center. Nothing goes out to the public internet, and nothing comes in from the public internet. And this is really important. It allows you to lock it down, and it makes sure that any traffic that goes out to the internet comes out through your proxy, not through ours. And again, this is the way our IT department deploys a lot of their solutions. And finally, very new, announced this week, is user-defined routes, which allow you to have control like this, where you can actually route traffic all through a single device, a bump in the wire, if you will. Maybe it's running an intrusion detection service, and that makes sure that the traffic that's going to go back is secure and protected as it goes back. Okay. So those are the IaaS components. Now let me spend a few minutes here pulling it all together for you. So when we look at the overall IaaS compute stack, we think of it in a continuum. And so I talked a lot about virtual machines and VM extensions. The things I did not talk about and won't talk about in today's session is sort of the other half, which is more of the very rapid deployment, PaaS-focused solutions, which we have great offerings on Azure as well. And so we do believe that this fits on the left side, the green side, versus the blue side. It's green because I like the left side. And so it enables that type of deployment, that ultimate control. Right? You saw you can configure your routes and your ACLing. I mean, it really gives the control to you, and that's the goal, while still giving some ease of use. The VM extensions are kind of the great combination of the control with the ease of use to try and make the cloud fun, but also safe and secure. So the thing that pulls a lot of this together is something that we just announced last week. And it's actually the Resource Manager we did not announce last week. That's been around for a while. But we did announce IaaS support in the Resource Manager. And what this does is it pulls all these things together, extensions, VMs, routes, ACLing, etc., into a single declarative template that you can check in. You can save somewhere. You can share with your peers. It can combine PaaS and IaaS. It can also just be IaaS. It actually is a new API that enables you to configure the role-based access control at the API level. And you can even do tagging. And so what this will enable is you can tag these resources. They'll show up in your bill as tagged resources. And so what you can do is you can actually start monitoring usage across your organization. Person X gets tag X. And then you start seeing person X is using quite a bit of compute. What are they doing? And you can actually start looking into some of these things. And so chargeback, showback, all these options become a reality with this type of control. And you can start doing that type of central auditing around access and tagging to start monitoring the resources. So again, we want to give you the control that you need while also giving the agility that the cloud has to offer. And so the other aspect of this is it creates long dependency chains. So I'll show you a SharePoint example in a minute, which is one of the most complex solutions to deploy, I would argue. And it has a bunch of dependencies. When this VM's done, take its parameters and send them to this VM. And when that's done, takes its parameters and send it to this VM. You can do all that in the template language. And makes the deployment consistent. It'll always work, right? Once you get it to work, it should always work. And it offers, again, deployment experiences across both IaaS and PaaS. It has parameters for you to share, so you can make a parameter section to your templates, and you can then share them with other people so they can redeploy them. Variables, so you can reuse them, and makes it very easy to sort of read the settings in it. And then, of course, the resources that are deployed. And the resources that we offer across all of them. We offer solutions around VMs, NICs, load balancers, security groups, extensions, and, of course, dependencies. So let me actually spend just a few minutes kind of walking you around some templates and show you what there is to show. OK. So first, let me start here. Oops. Let me start here. Just if you're looking for these and you walk away and you're like, that was great, or that was terrible, but I like those templates. Either way, you can go up to Community and hit Templates. This is a new section in our portal, so Azure.com, Community Templates. So let me show you what this looks like. There we go. OK. And it sort of explains a few things. And so you can see here just the types of, the amount of templates. Actually, there's a lot more here in just the last day. Wow. The type of templates you can deploy. Here you can see here's a GitHub Enterprise template, an AD template, a VM in a new AD forest, a 3 VM SharePoint farm, and you can deploy a Django app with SQL database. Huge amount of variety and options. There's an Elasticsearch solution in here. And so you can go through here and really have a lot of options to deploy complex or simple solutions. And so 3 VM SharePoint deployment. So here in Azure.com, here it explains all the parameters that this template has. And so if I hit deploy, let me actually do that in a new tab. This goes straight back into that portal experience when I hit deploy. And it pops it right in. And the template's here. I can even edit it directly in the portal experience. So here's the template. It's the JSON experience. We have documentation that explains every part of these resources. But you see here some of the parameters. Let me actually zoom down here. And see beyond the parameters what's interesting. So there's the variables. And so here's a VNet creation. And so you can say the NICs that are in the VNet. You can say sort of how they're going to be configured. This is the storage account that's being created. But maybe I don't care. I trust John, who gave this to me. And so instead, I just hit save and hit edit parameters. Now, excuse me, I can go in and just configure the parameters for my deployment. So if I want to build this SharePoint farm, I don't have to go recreate this thing. I just hit deploy, put in my parameters, and I've got a SharePoint farm ready to roll. And in fact, I did this last night using this exact template. And let's see here. I think I have it up. And so, oops, it was up. And so I deployed it last night, and it's actually running on premium storage. And so here's my SharePoint farm using that template. I've done nothing to it. And I can go in and quickly add a document, choose file. And so it's a fully running SharePoint farm. Let me actually go pictures. Let's see, camera roll. OK. Fully running SharePoint farm. Go ahead and write that file in. You can see it's running on premium storage, so it's lickety-split. I mean, it's really quite fast. And so there we go. Look at that. That's me working late on this template. I look kind of weird, don't I? All right, we'll close that out. Let's not look at that. And so you can see sort of the power that you get from this and the ability to sort of update that and modify that. All of those are actually stored in GitHub. So you can actually quickly go to GitHub, and here's the same SharePoint 3 VM template. And so you can go into GitHub and actually take a look at the template itself. There's the JSON file. You can modify it. You also can completely edit these and update these directly in Visual Studio. So if you're running Visual Studio and don't have meetings to go to, you're running in Visual Studio, you can hit OK, you can deploy Windows Virtual Machine, and right in Visual Studio using the newest SDK, you can generate these templates and you can add things to them in a very dynamic way. And so it enables you to reference them here. And so let's see. Where are we going here? Sorry, where is this thing? Let me just, there it is. Cool. Oh. Here we go. Pull that up. There we go. Look at that. All right. Took longer than it should have. And so here you can see I've got the breakdown on the left. It enables very easy usage in Visual Studio. I prefer actually Notepad++, frankly, to do my JSON editing. But it's very easy in Visual Studio. I can add things to it. I can configure. There's an availability set. I can add a MySQL database, all sorts of fun things. There's a public IP address that I may want to add. So Corey IP. And I can add that, and it'll immediately put that template language right into my JSON file. So very cool stuff. OK. So the last aspect that I kind of wanted to touch upon was something that I think is important as we continue to expand out both our partnerships, but also some of the growth that we've seen around excitement on containers. So I'm going to spend just a couple minutes on containers as sort of a wrap-up to sort of how you pull some of these things together. And so one of the things that we're seeing when it comes to containers and IaaS is a lot of usage or talk about containers offering efficiency on IaaS. The fact that it actually gives you this virtual OS partition and makes you feel like you're running within the same experience of a full VM or a full box, but it's actually only a partition of the box. And the utilization is much greater because it's not just hardware virtualization, but it's OS virtualization. And so the kernel and the memory are shared. And so it's very exciting, but the actual usage that we're seeing is less around the efficiency. And so this is what people talk about as great containers are efficient, right? They're going to be more efficient. They're going to change everything. What we're actually seeing the energy around containers is more around the agility that they offer, where you can deploy the same thing that you used to deploy. You can deploy the same app, one container on a VM, still has a lot of benefit because of how fast and agile it can be to deploy. So whether it be on a dev box, you can deploy them over and over and over again, or as part of the dev to IT transition or handoff, you can take those containers and deploy the exact same one in multiple locations. And this is actually where Docker has become really popular and really successful and really exciting because it creates a consistent deployment experience across all of these. And so we're seeing a lot of pickup in IaaS around containers, and we've made it very easy to get started with containers in Docker in Azure. And the main reason for this, I believe, is more on the side of agility, getting started extremely fast. Being able to deploy what used to take hours into minutes or even seconds is really where we're seeing containers take off and get exciting. And it's something that we're going to continue to enable and try and really light up big in Azure over time. And so as part of this, the Docker integration that we've already got Docker integration on Linux. You can run Docker client on Windows. We have orchestration support across Swarm, Compose, Kubernetes, and Mesosphere, and being able to sort of manage and deploy containers at broad scale. And we have plans to support a deeper integration with Docker Hub and a deeper support for Hyper-V containers and Windows Server containers, which are actually the Windows versions of containers. And those will integrate with Docker. Again, that same experience to deploy is very important. So what you may be asking is, what are those two containers and sort of how do they work? Well, the Windows Server container is very similar to the one I just showed you. Shared OS kernel, shared memory, has the feel of a full box, will be deployable via Docker, and again, has that high level of efficiency, agility to deploy, and a shared OS and kernel. Hyper-V containers are slightly different, but not maybe as different as you'd expect. They take advantage of hardware virtualization just like a VM, but they're a container format. They're the package of a container. They'll be deployable via Docker. So they'll still have that agility, that experience to deploy across multiple environments. And in fact, the decision to use a Hyper-V container is a deploy time decision. So it feels and looks and acts just like a container. But the big difference becomes this point, where you'll have the hardware machine is shared, just like a VM, but the kernel and the memory will be distinct, just like a VM. And so it has the experiences, the deployment ease, and the agility that containers have all up, which is why we're calling it a container, but it has the isolation that you'd expect from a virtual machine. So this is why we do believe this is a nice additional support across the entire spectrum, again, with Docker sitting on top of all of it. So this gets me into sort of the last couple slides. First one being mostly focused on our ecosystem. This is a really important, I showed you the marketplace, the exciting parts of our ecosystem to be able to deploy a huge amount of partner applications, on behalf of customers. You can deploy solutions like SAP. We see that as a very popular one. You can deploy Oracle. You can deploy IBM solutions, a bunch of security solutions. You can deploy Barracuda-based appliances. You can deploy Riverbed for WAN optimizers. A lot of different options here across our overall ecosystem. And then, of course, consulting partners to help pull it all together as well. The other aspects of our ecosystem are our internal ones. And so we do and have announced additional support, especially with premium storage. The ability to deploy Dynamics. You can deploy across all the Dynamics offerings. SQL Server, which we've had for a while, but works great now with premium storage. SharePoint as well. And then actually Exchange is a very recent addition to the party. And the most common usage case for this would be a DR-based deployment, again, using premium storage as sort of the required deployment mechanism there. And so, we feel really good about this growing ecosystem. We want to be there for the apps and solutions that you're going to want, when you want them, and how you want them. And sort of as the last touch here, we also believe in extending the ecosystem to support PaaS-based offerings. And so we have announced plans to support Cloud Foundry on top of the IaaS instances, Apprenda on top of the IaaS instances, and JElastic on top of the IaaS instances. The goal is being able to offer the full spectrum of PaaS you may want. Some of these may surprise you, because there may be parts of them that compete with other parts of Microsoft. But we want to offer a full spectrum of solution that you may want, when you want, and how you want. And Service Fabric, which is the PaaS platform that I talked about earlier, that is the first-party platform that we announced just last week, also runs on top of these IaaS VMs. Okay. So in closing, when we look at the Azure cloud, we're very excited about offering a unique experience across hybrid, enterprise-grade, and hyperscale. We believe we're the only cloud that does it. And we believe that actually the hybrid story is the strongest in the industry. Azure Stack being announced this week really helps tie that together as a complete story to deploy both private, hosted, and public cloud. And the enterprise-grade and hyperscale offers will enable you to deploy whatever app you want when you want it. With our goal, again, to bring our cloud to you. We're not demanding that you come. With the recent announcement of the template support, the ease to be able to deploy, manage, and monitor those, to be able to add extensions to them, to be able to deploy PowerShell directly to them, whether it be from PowerShell or whether it be from the portal. You can launch and manage them directly. It should enable a much better agility and time to market while also having an impact on the total cost of ownership. And again, we hope to meet any scale at any time. And that comes back to the hyperscale promise. And so with that, I hope that you get a chance to go out there and play a little bit with Azure VMs, spend some time building some things up, play with some templates, do some pull requests into GitHub. We'll take them and really look forward to seeing that. So thank you guys so much for your time. I'm going to stay up here and answer some questions as well. So.